Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. There's been a new front that's opened up in the Maga civil war. First, it was Trump and Tucker Carlson at odds. Then Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes are palling around. Next, Fuentes declared that Maga is dead. And now Trump is publicly denouncing Marjorie Taylor Greene because she won't let go of the Epstein files. I would go and get some popcorn and watch the show, but I'm too scared of choking to death from eating while laughing. But it's not Trump, Greene, or even Fuentes that I'd be laughing at. Now, the people who deserve our derision are the Democrat shills who were talking about how Project 2025 was going to be the end of America. And you notice that since the elections 2 weeks ago, they're not saying that anymore. In fact, looking at how the polls have been trending since the summer, they haven't been saying that. They've been having a good old time pointing at the MAGA faithful and asking, is this your king? That kind of thing. And there's a lesson in that for the people who might have bought into all of that hysteria. You better learn how to recognize political ops when you see them. Now, as for MAGA forming a circular firing squad, the reason the white right keeps running into this problem over and over is because their movements are all about phony white grievance. You have the in crowd, the establishment, the dominant society who the country is always produced for, and the only way that they can try to justify their own immoral behavior is to offer up phony objections based on lies. Nobody's oppressing these people because no one has the power or the desire to. They still act the way that their ancestors acted and have to try to justify it through lies, so nothing they say is ever going to be consistent. Of course, these creeps are at each other's throats. What do you think happened after the end of the 19th century when they had colonized the world? Did the Europeans finally calm down and become civilized after that? Or did they immediately rearm and begin shooting at one another? The Europeans can't afford to be honest about their behavior, and that's why they keep repeating the same cycle over and over. And that goes for the political left as well. You gotta stop listening to them and start listening to the black media. All of you shills, bootlicks, DNC plants, and ops who have spent the last 10 years trying to co-opt our movement and our message to denounce us, who lied about us and told people that we were Russian bots, and who said vote blue no matter who, and that the Democrats are our only hope. But then, no sooner than the Democrats scored their first major victory during Trump's second term, than they immediately turned around and surrendered to the Republicans. So much for the so-called resistance, huh? If these people knew what the hell they were talking about, how come none of them was talking about how America was going to bear witness to a MAGA civil war, and that apparently all of these croakings of doom and gloom weren't actually going to materialize? Things have gone exactly as the black media told you they would, because as the black media, we don't act from a place of fear. We act from a place of cold, clinical analyses. What I say doesn't have to please the shills. In fact, I work to make sure it doesn't because they're liars and fools. All my words have to be is the truth. And how do we know truth from lies? What is the objective standard to tell the difference? Time. Time reveals everything. And we didn't have to wait long at all to see if the Orange Man being back in office would be some fascist takeover, like certain people were saying, and we didn't have to wait long to see if the Democrats and their operatives were full of it. And here the establishment right thought that their biggest issue would be whether or not Nick Fuentes could elbow his way into being Charlie Kirk's heir apparent. Now they got another problem. Trump is now having a public spat with a woman who used to be one of his biggest boosters. Marjorie Greene has totally changed her tone and her demeanor in the last couple of months. She's not doing the hick, mean girl persona that she's been running since she got into politics. Now she's trying to talk like a statesman. She's trying to talk like she wants to run for the Senate or something. Or maybe she has her sights set on higher offices than that. She's talking to the base like she's the leader of the party, more than Mike Johnson. Marjorie Greene's dramatic tonal shift certainly seems to be her testing the political waters on that one, but before she can call herself putting together any presidential exploratory committees, she's going to need to have a big flashy victory that she can point to all her own. She has no major legislation that she's ever written, nothing that she can point to and say, I wrote that law for such and such. So her leading the charge on releasing the Epstein files is definitely the next best thing. And if it takes down some of the establishment GOP, even better, because it makes her someone who can say, I'm the one who's actually draining the swamp. Everybody else was talking about it, but I actually did something about it. That seems to be the political calculus that she's using. But if she's able to actually pull it off, I wonder, what are the Democrats going to say then? What about their activist base? What about their pundit class? These are individuals who were cursing Nick Fuentes, telling everybody that he's mobbed up with Donald Trump, visiting Mar-a-Lago, an open anti-Semite. He's a core part of Project 2025, remember that? Nick Fuentes was proof positive that Trump was pure evil and that he had to be stopped, and that this was a right-wing fascist takeover that was going to happen if he got reelected. But now there seems to be some ambiguity about Nick Fuentes. He's flawed, but otherwise making valid points. Notice how none of these people ever points to the black media? Our message hasn't changed one iota. I told you from the very beginning that while Trump's deportations were nice to see, the problem was that the Republican-controlled Congress had not ponied up the resources that would be necessary for this absolutely epic task. Their effort wasn't broad enough or aggressive enough to actually be truly effective. And I also pointed out that Donald Trump had been making exceptions for certain industries almost from the very beginning. What that means are certain agribusiness corporations who were telling him to protect their bottom line and to not deport their slave labor and to force them to hire Americans at livable wages. That's what they wanted an exception from. He made exceptions for farms first, and then home builders, and now he's moved on to what the tech bros wanted, an exception for those B-1 visas, which means mostly programmers from India. That's what these white guys are so furious about. Because tech was supposed to be their private preserve. That's the reason why you had all of these young, angry white guys online talking about we need to be deporting all of the Indians. That's where a large amount of this Indian hate, quote unquote, has been coming from. Why do you think those creeps from Doge like Marco Velez were specifically singling out Indians when he talked about who he's racist against and who he wanted to see deported? And why is it that you got all of these online white males who are nutting up when it comes to Indians? White supremacy is a system of goodies, giveaways, but most importantly, guarantees. White supremacy is a devil's bargain between white power and those classified as white that they would never have to compete for their daily bread. That was the promise that was made hundreds of years ago, because every time they had to compete, most of them failed. This is why you got all those white guys who are pointing their ire at the Indians, but it never occurred to them that the white elites looked and think that immigrants will be grateful just to be here, and that they won't even occasionally grumble, like these white guys do. There's no real danger of this resulting in a permanent fracture between the Indians and the angry white males, by the way. After all, the Indians in their culture do idolize white skin. India sells more skin bleaching products than anywhere else on earth. It's the same factor at work with the mass deportations. Those didn't result in mass riots at U.S. embassies all over Latin America. They would never do that because many of them identify as white themselves. But what's happening is the hardcore right-wing ideology that the Maga base wanted is running headlong into Trump's cock and bull con man routine. All of that model minority stuff, that was just white power doing the usual game of propping up a buffer group whose entire purpose was to give them the ability to say, hey, there can't be any racism. Black people are lying after all. How do you explain the success of these people over here? Yeah, these cherry-picked immigrants who they handpicked to let in and selectively gave them special programs and tangibles set aside just for immigrants. How do you explain their success, right? Now, black people knew the game. These other people didn't. And now they're seeing that the white hand that had the power to give them everything also has the power to take it away and was just waiting for the opportunity to do so. And speaking of taking things, that's what these people who thought that they were white power adjacent have to do now. They just have to take it. This is an issue that's gained more steam with the now public split between Trump and Congresswoman Greene. She's on TV talking about how she's going to propose legislation that's going to phase out the B-1 visa program altogether. Combine that with her refusal to withdraw her vote to open the Epstein files, and that's why Trump is publicly denouncing her now. He's calling her a whack job, and he's also said that if anyone in her district wants to challenge her in a primary, he would support them. So he's gone from Marjorie Greene as good people to get this loser out of here. Now, this is important because all of this is happening without the Democrats being in charge of the government. In fact, it's all happening without the Democrats doing anything at all. Same way that the 2020 uprisings was what led to the police finally getting arrested and charged on a regular basis at least part of the time. And now we're seeing MAGA go the same way as the alt-right, but not because Democrats brought it down. Not because Democrats organized themselves and pushed legislation or got a whole bunch of candidates on the ballot or finally stonewalled the white rights agenda somehow, but because white supremacy is a gang of thieves. And there's no honor among thieves. Of course, these guys are at each other's throats. They don't have any core principles. They don't have any guiding set of beliefs. All they have are demonic impulses and a psychopathic anti-black obsession. But this is more proof that these online operatives have been totally fear-mongering and gaslighting us from the jump, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of individuals who were lecturing us before now about how dangerous the Orange Man and his crew would be if they got back in office. Now these same people are going to be claiming that they knew these guys were going to turn on each other the whole time. Family, in less than a week, we've seen both the Democrats and the Republicans turning on each other in less than a week. Democrats went from a major political victory to capitulating on the shutdown, and now, a few days after that, Trump and the Republicans went from bragging that they broke the Democrat stonewall on the shutdown to now all of these guys forming a circular firing squad. This is not about these guys infighting with one another. This is about understanding what their real goal is: donor dollars in return for political policy, and that policy is ultimately to maintain a racial hierarchy. Both parties have shown their total devotion to that, no matter what their squabbling in public may be. But I hope now that with these recent developments, a few more of you are understanding what you saw last year was some world-class hysteria. And I need you to remember who your favorite cable talking heads were who spread that nonsense and how these political prostitutes lied to you. We didn't have to change our tune. They had to change theirs. Yes, MAGA is vile and evil, but no more than the Democrat establishment. What are they going to do to actually fight the policies that the white right has enacted? Nothing. All they care about is catering to the same corporate interests as Trump. And if the only difference between the two major parties is their rhetoric, then that means there is no difference. And speaking of no difference, that also goes for our agenda as well. That also goes for our demands. That goes for our hardline stance. That's not going to change either. So, what are the people who told us that Project 2025 was going to be the end of America? Now, with the MAGA Civil War having broken out, what are they going to say to fearmonger people for next year's midterms? The MAGA Gestapo that they warned us about never materialized. Instead, I'm willing to bet they're going to go back to the old playbook. That's how white supremacy is. They don't have any new moves. They just do the same thing, only more of it. They'll point out GOP dysfunction, and they'll also say, hey, Trump hasn't done anything about inflation. He's only made it worse. And something AI is going to take all your jobs. That's what they'll be saying. Never mind that the tech bros building those data centers that are going to use up all the water and accelerate global warming with how much energy they require, all of that stuff came out of California. And they didn't do anything to rein them in there either. Though they did make sure to fight tooth and claw against reparations, now that they did do. So while watching the maggots have their public brawls may be entertaining, just keep in mind, last week the Democrats showed you that no matter how bad the rancor may seem to be publicly, they have no problem in a heartbeat making common cause with the Republicans and going ahead and making a deal. Ultimately, that's how this is going to shake out. All you have are two groups of anti-black zealots arguing amongst themselves about which one of them is going to hold the whip over us and which one of them gets the lion's share of the loot. That's what this argument is actually about. It's not about stopping injustice. It's about better positioning themselves to benefit from it. And that's the reason why we're not going to play any of their political games. See, we're not fighting for donor dollars. We're not fighting for a better parking spot in front of Capitol Hill. We are fighting for our very right to exist. And until we see someone stepping forward in the political arena with a real plan that actually addresses the most pressing issue of the day, which happens to be black empowerment, then it doesn't matter if it's Chuck Schumer versus Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders, or Trump versus Fuentes and Marjorie Greene. No matter which one of these people are brawling, we recognize that it's not our fight. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Kenneth Johnson, Bobby Ross, Sean, Chris Pruitt, and Atu Hammond. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.